to the economic fundamentals.
Finance.
We're forecasting euro-dollar at 114 by the end of this year.
Global money doesn't like uncertainty.
Investment.
In order to grow, you need to innovate.
Business is actually doing better at the base, and I think that that's what's going on in the stock market.
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and David Gura on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, good morning on a Monday. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio. David Gura in New York, Francine Lacqua in London. Tom Keene is off today. We continue to monitor Hurricane Harvey, now with Tropical Storm Harvey in Texas, continuing to inundate the area around Houston with a lot of rain. We'll have updates on that throughout the morning, obviously flooding a huge concern to folks living in that area. We're also continuing to talk about the Economic Policy Symposium convened by the Kansas City Fed that wrapped up over the weekend in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Here on Bloomberg Surveillance, brought to you by Sector Spider ETFs. Why buy a single stock when you can invest in the entire sector? Visit SPDRS.com or call 1-866-SECTOR-ETF. All morning we've been getting valuable perspective from Jim Roemer. Jim Roemer, who is with Best Weather, joining us now on our phone line, sponsored by Spectrum Enterprise, your nationwide provider of scalable fiber network services and managed cloud solutions. And Jim, all through the weekend into this morning, we've heard this storm is unprecedented. We've heard it called variously a 100-year storm, a 500-year storm. Give us some context, if you would. What do you make of what we're seeing, again, still over Texas this morning?
Yeah, we actually saw this about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago because of a variety of factors going on in the atmosphere with no El Nino, the cooling Pacific Oceans, also a variety of other factors. So, yes, this is a 1-in-100-year storm, and flooding will continue around the Houston area. We also talked about late last week this thing probably going back into the Gulf and heading toward Louisiana. Now you're seeing a lot of the weather forecasters getting on board, and this could actually affect some of the cotton crop in much of the Delta and the South, and continue to cause problems with refineries for at least a few more days. I think a lot of people are saying, oh, this is kind of a short-term situation with refineries. We don't know that for sure. You get 40 inches of rain in a matter of 5 days, there could be unprecedented damage. And as a result, you're seeing spreads between heating oil and crude and gasoline all over the place, with gasoline right now being the leader.
Yeah, let's talk about those commodities in just a minute here, but I want to ask you about the particular might of this storm. You mentioned it going back into the Gulf, gathering more strength. What makes this particular storm so powerful? What's causing it to sort of hang over Houston in the way it is?
Well, there is a very strong blocking ridge over the Pacific Northwest, much of the West Coast experiencing record heat again, brush fires just going out of control, Canada having the most brush fires in history. You got this hot weather out west that initially affected some of the corn belt and corn crops back in June and July, but has since then weakened and moved to the west. That's resulted in a downward spiral in corn and beans the last 6 to 7 weeks. You got a blocking ridge out west that slows hurricanes down, and the Gulf waters are the warmest they've ever been, really, and this is just creating this incredible fetch of moisture and intensity of this storm. Last one that hit the United States, a Category 4 or higher, I think was Wilma back in 2005.
Jim, has it shut all of the refineries in the region? I'm looking at a story saying it's shut more than 10% of U.S. fuel-making capacity, but it's basically shut everything, in and around Houston, right?
I think about 30% of the refinery capacity is shut down. People are asking me this morning, well, why isn't natural gas reacting? Why isn't crude oil reacting? Well, it's actually hurting demand. I mean, there's millions of people without power, hundreds of thousands certainly, and the cool August we've had across much of the country is creating a downward move in natural gas. It's not really affecting production. It's affecting the refineries for crude, that's meaning the gasoline and heating oil over Texas and also Louisiana.
How long will it take to actually estimate the damage?
That's a little bit out of my expertise because I haven't seen this storm in my life. It's going to probably take at least several weeks, I think. And, if we have severe damage, worse than people expect over even 10% of the refineries in the Gulf, that's going to keep the gasoline market pretty strong. With, the holidays coming up here, people tend to drive a lot. There's no demand for heating oil this time of the year, but there is demand for gasoline. So we're going to see kind of a wild energy market here probably for the next week or two.
Jim, let's go back to a commodity you mentioned. You talked about cotton, obviously still grown in quantity along the Gulf Coast, and we've been focused here on energy, focused on refineries and pipelines and the like. Just give us some more perspective on that, the importance here of this storm to that cotton crop.
Yeah, I think we're seeing cotton up today. It's more of a psychological impact. In the world scheme of things, really China is the main player. Much of southeast Texas through Louisiana produce probably about I don't know, maybe 5%, maybe 10% max of the U.S. cotton crop, but in the global scheme of things, it's less than 2%. So we're seeing kind of a knee-jerk reaction in cotton, but whether or not we get into a real bull market, there's got to be some other major weather issues around the world, and that's something we're going to try to watch pretty quickly. But this is probably just a short-term reaction in the cotton market.
On the issue of refining and pipelines, how much changed after Hurricane Katrina? Obviously, there was extensive damage done to both refineries and to pipelines, of course, to rigs as well that are in the Gulf. We haven't talked about those yet either. But how much has that system changed in the last 10, 11 years?
Well, Katrina was an unprecedented situation, and the fact that it was a Category, I think, 5 just before it made landfall, and the Henry Hub, which produces and transports a lot of our natural gas, was damaged for days. I remember on Friday, prior to Katrina, a lot of people weren't thinking this was going to go into the Gulf. We actually were lucky and predicted it. But crude and natural gas collapsed on Friday prior to Katrina, thinking there wouldn't be any damage. We walked in on Monday after Katrina, and we were like $5 or $6 higher in crude and several dollars higher in natural gas because it actually hurt the infrastructure, the flooding in Louisiana, the Henry Hub, the high winds. They have since then, really beefed up the building codes over Louisiana and the Henry Hub and all along the Gulf Coast. So this storm right now is more of a flooding situation. Katrina was flooding, but also very high winds that damaged infrastructure. This is not damaging infrastructure. This is more actually hurting demand and causing this short-term concern with refineries mainly for gasoline.
Jim, do we have any idea of how long the plants will be shut for? I know this is an ongoing situation. I don't want to ask you unfair questions, but actually it's interrupting gasoline supplies. Do we know if it's for a week or 2 months?
Again, it's not for me to say for sure because I don't know how much rain is going to be needed, unfortunately, to really hurt the infrastructure of these refineries. I don't know. I think it's probably mostly a short-term effect. When you have a hurricane, usually it comes in and out in one day. This is going to reform perhaps into a Category 1 hurricane again and hit Louisiana and meander, for 5 or 6 days since Friday. That's a long time. There's a lot of flooding going on, so it's going to take another week or two before people determine how much damage has actually occurred. Again, if this would hurt pipelines in the Henry Hub region or shut down natural gas production for, say, a week like Katrina did, this would have more of an impact in natural gas. But we're seeing a very cool summer. That's bearish natural gas. And we're also seeing demand destruction with hundreds of thousands of people without power. And, again, that's the reason why natural gas has not reacted, but the gasoline market, which is a product of crude, has.
Is there any way of knowing how high gasoline prices could go?
Well, with OPEC continuing to produce so much, and we have an incredible amount of shale production, we're not going to go to any major bull market, in my opinion, in the crude oil market anytime soon. So this reaction in gasoline is probably just short-term. If the Eagle Ford shale region, which is over southeast Texas, was hurt more from flooding, and that affected shale production, I think there'd be much more of an impact in the crude and natural gas markets. So I don't think the weather is bullish crude oil by any means. Certainly global supplies are increasing. We're seeing the Arctic refuge being explored more. We're seeing China taking steps toward renewable energy, more solar power, but hopefully, I believe in that, in the years to come. So it's going to take some unfortunate terrorist act by that nutcase in Kim Jong in North Korea or something to get crude oil probably out of the doldrums.
Give us just the latest forecast here. Again, the storm hovering over Houston now. What's the forecasting saying about how long it's going to be there and how much the rain is going to continue, Jim?
Yeah, and again, a lot of models last week were saying this is going to go into Texas and die, and we kind of second-guessed this from our experience and said, hey, I think it's going to go into Houston, maybe even to Louisiana this week, and we are seeing that reaction today in gasoline because of this. But it's going to hover for another 72 to 96 hours, probably 25 miles offshore of Houston. It's going to be moving back into the open waters. My goodness, there could be another 10 to 20 inches of rain over the next 3 days, and it just unprecedented, and just feel so sorry for all these people. Their infrastructure of canals in Houston are antiquated. they really haven't beefed up a lot of the building codes and things there like they had in Louisiana back after Katrina in 2005.
Yeah, a very good point. Again, some particular challenges with where this storm has made landfall. Jim Roemer joining us on our phone line, sponsored by Spectrum Enterprise, your nationwide provider of scalable fiber.